Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Monique Leslie Akasi. I am the Special Assistant to the President for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Strategic Initiatives here at West Liberty University. Today is Monday, March 28th, 2022, and we are excited to have with us today a renowned award-winning writer, artist, professor, and one who is spearheading a vitally important project, the Tuskegee Airmen Nurses. So we welcome each and every one of you. And I am going to go ahead and begin by introducing Ms. Pia Marie Winters Jordan. And so I will begin. Mrs. Pia Marie Winters Jordan is the project director of the Tuskegee Army Nurses Project. She continues to work on a multimedia documentary on the Army Nurse Corps members who served with the Tuskegee Airmen at Tuskegee Army Airfield during World War II. Her mother, Louise Virginia Lomax Winters, was a first lieutenant and one of those nurses. Jordan retired in 2018 as an associate professor in the School of Global Journalism and Communication, Department of Multimedia Journalism at Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland, which is my alma mater as well. In addition to teaching, she served as advisor to the Morgan State University Association of Black Journalists and was the station manager for the campus television station Bear TV. The broadcast journalist came to Morgan in August of 2008, where she taught hundreds of students in broadcast news, writing and reporting, broadcast production, producing television and radio news, internship preparation, media studies, and senior capstone. Some of her students moved on to commercial news operations and various roles, which include reporting. She is also the writer of an award-winning screenplay that she is attempting to have produced. Before joining the Morgan faculty, she served almost 20 years as an anchor reporter and producer for the Howard County Government Information Channel, GTV, located in Columbia, Maryland. She mentored approximately 50 high school and university journalism students during that time and anchored, wrote, and produced more than 1,000 newscasts and public affairs programs. Producing public affairs programs was also part of her responsibilities before joining GTV when she worked for WMAR TV in Baltimore, Maryland, a network affiliate station. She served as the assistant public affairs director there, as well as an associate news producer. She earned her Master of Arts in Journalism, Public Relations Affairs, Radio, Television at American University in Washington, D.C., and her Bachelor of Science in Journalism, Broadcast News from the University of Maryland, College Park College of Journalism. For 2 years before transferring to the University of Maryland, she also attended the Mass Communications program at Bethany College in Bethany, West Virginia, which is right up the road from us. The television journalist is the daughter of the late, great Reverend John Lonnie Winters, who was a United Methodist minister. Her mother died in 2011. After her service as a military nurse, her mom worked as a psychiatric nurse at what was then a federal mental institution in Washington, D.C. Jordan is the wife of the Reverend Dr. Basha Jordan Jr., founder of Hope Alive Outreach, which started in Baltimore, Maryland, and now functions in St. Petersburg, Florida, where the couple now resides. That ministry is part of an outreach for those who suffer from drug addiction. He is also a former United Methodist Church pastor, and they are the parents of 2 adult children and 1 grandson. Wow. Welcome, welcome, welcome. That is highly impressive, and we're so humbled, honored, and grateful to have you here with us today, Mrs. Jordan, during the Great Women's History Month. And we celebrate you, we celebrate your mother, we celebrate all the renowned sheroes, both past, present, and the future. Welcome, Mrs. Jordan, Professor Jordan. You wear many hats.
Yeah, I do. Thank you for having me. And
I think
hello,
you're on
West
mute.
Liberty. What did you say? I am not on mute. I have my mic open.
Okay, I hear you now. Yes.
All right.
Welcome.
Okay, and I was saying hello, West Liberty. I'm quite familiar with your campus.
Yes, yes. We have to physically get you back over here on the mountain. The hilltoppers would love to embrace you, Professor Jordan. It's such a pleasure to have you here with us. How are you?
I am fine, thank you. I'm really blessed. I had a television interview this morning from a Baltimore television station, and tomorrow, the subject is the Tuskegee Airmen Nurses, and tomorrow, Air University at Maxwell Air Force Base, there I'm going to do a presentation there. So I'm real excited because I get to talk about my mother.
Yes. Oh my. Oh, it's just, we cannot wait to hear more about your project and your beautiful, beautiful, brilliant, amazing mother and all of the Tuskegee Army nurses as well. And so what I'd like to do, I'd like to start with just asking you a few questions, and then I'd like for you to just, if you like, you could just go and go off into even greater detail. I know you have a lot of rich information, even through your, I think I have shared content up so you can share information as well. And this is definitely an ongoing conversation. And again, we'd love to invite you here one day once the weather breaks. It's snowed again here today. I know you're down in the Sunshine State, but it's snowed again here in West Liberty.
Okay. Yeah. I had many years of that, so I'm familiar.
Oh, yes. Yes, indeed. Yes. So let me ask you this, Professor Jordan. Why did you start the Tuskegee Airmen Nurses Project? This is so powerful. What inspired you? Why did you start this project? We hear a lot about the Tuskegee Airmen, but rarely do we hear about the Tuskegee Airmen Nurses.
Correct. Yes. Well, of course, I started this project as a legacy project because my mother was one of the Tuskegee Airmen nurses. And you're right, a lot's been said about the Tuskegee Airmen, but like one of the airmen said in his book, for every airman, there were 10 people who were doing duty on the ground. And some of them were the nurses, and he called them heroines. So yeah, the nurses were there, and the thing is, I'm kind of I could knock myself in the head. It wasn't until I got into academia at Morgan that I said, "Here I am, a journalist, and I've never done anything about the nurses." Because here's what happened: my mother became ill, and I'm her only child. I went through her apartment. She was independent, but then she went into a nursing home. And I saw this blue, and hopefully we'll be able to bring up the scrapbook. It's my mother's scrapbook, and on the outside it had Tuskegee Army Flying School. And so I looked in the book, and there are all these pictures and stuff just thrown in. And so I went through it and tried to put things in place. And then it hit me. I said my mother was with the Tuskegee Airmen. Oh my goodness. And I was talking to one of my new colleagues, and I said, I never did anything with it. And she said, why don't you start now? And reminded me, the first thing you do, you gotta interview them because they were in their 90s, 80s and 90s. And so I got on a plane, I got on the road. I've been to archives and museums, literally all over the country, from West Coast to East Coast, from the north of United States of America to the south of the United States of America. And finally, I I just spent, what, 12 years just compiling the information, getting the interviews and transcribing the interviews. And so it's to not only tell my mother's story, but there were 28 nurses who came through that base. And you have to understand something. These nurses were lieutenants in the Army Nurse Corps.
Wow.
And that meant they were officers. Now, who you came to know as the Tuskegee Airmen, that name didn't attach to the airmen until the 1950s. Now we're talking about 1940s now. And so I hope all of you have looked up the history of the Tuskegee Airmen, but it was an experience, a project to see if African-American men were smart enough to fly military planes, because we were on the brink of, looks like we were going to be in World War II, which we were. And so initially they had a quota that 56 Black nurses could become a member of the Army Nurse Corps. Now, you have to also remember, Black nurses weren't allowed to work in white hospitals. They were not allowed to, take care of white patients. They would only be allowed once it got approved that they needed nurses. So once it got approved that Black nurses could work in the military, they could only work with Black patients, German prisoner of war, and maybe Italian prisoners of war. But they were lieutenants, and the airmen, they were pilot cadets. They had no rank. I got some great stories. They had to salute the nurses because the nurses were officers and they weren't.
Wow, that was powerful, especially during that time, to salute a woman, a lieutenant. Wow.
Yeah, they went in as second lieutenants. And another thing, to be in the Army Nurse Corps, you had to have gone to nursing school, a school that had been approved, and you had to be a registered nurse, an RN. Now that was pretty major. These were professional nurses down at where the base was, Tuskegee, Alabama. And if you know the story there, here comes a Black air base in Tuskegee, Alabama, a predominantly white city. Can you imagine Black people in a city that probably no one wanted them there? However, I do have to mention Tuskegee Institute, at that time it was Tuskegee Institute, was also in Tuskegee, Alabama. So I guess the people, they were somewhat used to students who were African Americans, but here comes a whole Army base and they had guns. These were Black people with guns and military experience.
Wow, that is so extraordinary. Oh my gosh. And let me ask you this as a follow-up. Who were the Tuskegee Airmen nurses? If you can lift the veil and allow us to enter into that privileged space, if you will, that's rarely talked about. Who were the Tuskegee Airmen nurses?
Okay, the Tuskegee Airmen nurses were, as I said, registered nurses from all over the country. They attended basically nursing schools that I found for them in the Northeast or the South. So back then there were some white colleges, universities who had programs to train Black nurses. And my mother and 3 other of the Tuskegee Airmen nurses were a part of this. They attended St. Philip Hospital School of Nursing in Richmond, Virginia. And there were other locations, but there were also Negro schools who had nursing programs. So you're talking about Hampton, back then Institute, Freedman's, which is near Howard University. So these nurses were educated and they were from we had at least one from the western part of the country, but and the mid kind of west, I guess you would call that, and north. But many of these women were Southerners. Now, the women coming from the north, it wasn't as, I guess, prejudiced up north as it was down south. Now, the southern nurses, they understood the rules. You know, they understood that you don't, you know, pretty much you cross the street if a white person was coming down a sidewalk. You couldn't buy things in the store. You definitely couldn't try on clothes. But let me share one thing. If you're looking at me now, do you see the woman over my right, my right shoulder, facing me, facing
the
my
fair
right shoulder?
complected
Yes,
lady.
right. What I
That's your
want,
mother, isn't it?
that's my mother.
I knew it.
Hey, Mom.
She's
Okay.
beautiful.
Oh yeah, she was. I have to tell you what some Tuskegee Airmen told me. But one of the things, because she was light skinned and she never passed, but whenever she went into town, no one knew that she wasn't white. So she told me she got to, you know, go around probably more so than her other sisters. Now there were a couple more light-skinned nurses, but the rest of the nurses had a darker hue. So
Did they think she was white when she went into
yes,
town?
probably. Yes, I think throughout her military career, because she ended up in Ohio, Michigan, that they didn't know. Or they were going, huh, is she white or what? So anyway, she was able to go around in some areas that her military sisters were not. But yes, being in the Southern nurses understood the rules, the being of segregation. And some of the Northern nurses, you know, had a little bit of problem because once they crossed into Washington, D.C., they had to go to the back of the train. They couldn't be fed in the dining room, I guess, unless they were behind a curtain. So it was an interesting time for them, but it was an exciting time because these were the first men who were African-American men who were going to be allowed to fly military planes. Yeah, and so just going down there, they would be working at the station hospital. And as a matter of fact, while we're doing this now, I guess, on March 29th, tomorrow, 80 years ago, that's when the first 5 of them arrived at Tuskegee. Well, it's the 80th anniversary of their arriving there. Now, the base was, they started up in 1941, but it wasn't until 1942 that the nurses showed up.
Wow. And we're excited for that as well, Professor Jordan, because tomorrow we're once this is televised strategically on the 80th anniversary, all the students, faculty, and staff and the community up here on the mountain and beyond will be able to see it as televised. And it may even be picked up through the local news as well. But wow, 80 years ago.
Yeah, there's my connection to West Virginia.
That's right. That's right. Wow.
I say I'm a alumni of Bethany College. So I was there. I participated. I even gone back to what would have been my reunion. So a couple of us who left Bethany but came back for the reunion, we're alumni.
Wow. Wow. And so how long were you at Bethany before you transferred?
Yeah, I transferred my junior year, so I was there my freshman and sophomore years, and it was a beautiful time. Bethany is a very small. It was then very small college. It was half the size of my high school. So I received a partial scholarship. That's why I ended up there. And a couple of women from my high school, they attended Bethany. So that's why I looked into it. And since they were giving me some money, I ended up.
Sure. Sure. Wow. Wow. Now tell us a little bit more regarding this Tuskegee Airmen Nurses Project. What steps did you take to document the story?
All right. Let me go through what I had to go through to get as far as I've gotten this far, now. Um, First of all, I made plane reservations. I
Mhm,
went to, and I'm sorry, I meant to bring my tea with me here, but I went to uh, California, where one of the nurses was located, and she had been a really good friend of my mother's because she wasn't giving out interviews.
Oh,
So, but she knew my mother. We'd even traveled overseas together after, my mother, after they had been in the military. And
mhm.
like I said, I've heard from other children of the Tuskegee Airmen and the nurses, we didn't talk a lot about them being in the Tuskegee, experience. So
Wow.
yeah,
Why not?
well, you know what? I think we were kids, and
Mhm,
it probably we weren't didn't care,
mhm,
or 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 I think it may have been difficult for them to talk about that period in time because keep in mind, they were in a place who didn't want them. They were
mhm,
in a country who, in a country that was segregated.
mhm,
They couldn't use the water fountains. They couldn't use
mhm,
as others. They couldn't use the bathrooms as others.
mhm,
Um, for many, it was degrading. And
mm,
even my mother told a story. She grew up in Crewe, Virginia, part of Nottoway County, Virginia.
mhm,
And I remember she was saying she had to go at the back of a store to get some item, milk, ice cream, whatever. And she said how degrading that
mm,
was for them.
mm,
So after I did the interviews, I interviewed um, three of the nurses, including my mother. Those are the only ones I knew at that time were alive.
mhm,
Then I interviewed a few of the actual Tuskegee Airmen and the pilots.
mhm,
And I attended the Tuskegee Airmen National Convention when it was held in Maryland in 2011. So I had some of my students come with me. I had one dressed as a nurse. She was very popular at this event. And another student, he recorded video
mhm.
that I did with the airmen. And I'll just mention a couple stories because I'll tell you more. A book is coming out about this, and I don't want to give you everything that's in the book, but I will
Wonderful.
tell you this. One airman, well, actually, a couple of them told me that the nurses were officers, so they would pretend to be sick so they could go down and see the nurses. But the those I guess officers, the males who knew better, just sent them back. They knew they weren't really sick. So
Mm,
that was one way for the airmen to get to see the nurses because the nurses hung with other officers, so
yeah,
they weren't about to have any relationship with these nurses.
sure.
So that's what a couple of them told me they did. And that the nurses were nice and they wanted to go down there and see them or wherever
Mhm.
they had to go to see them on the base.
Wow. Wow. So
Oh,
profound.
but let me I'm sorry, I told you about the interviews,
Mhm,
but what I also did, um, I also had interviews with the nurses in, of course, Maryland, California, and New Jersey.
mhm,
Then I went to, and at the same time, but at different times, um, to archives, the United States Archives 1 and 2, the
mhm,
Tuskegee Airmen National Historical Site, their museum there. There's in Detroit, there's a museum. The Schomburg Center, which
mhm,
is a library of African American history in New York, I
mhm,
went there.
mm,
Um, let's see, the University of California at Riverside has a Tuskegee Airmen archive. I'm probably forgetting some, but then once I went to all these locations, I then started online.
Mhm.
looking at um, census reports,
Mhm.
newspaper articles about the nurses. So, I'm going on those sites, ancestry.com, geology.com, see, whatever else, My Heritage. I went to the Mormon, a I taught for about a week at the what was it, the university, Brigham Young University in Utah. And
Mhm.
so there's in Salt Lake City, Utah, the Mormons have a just quite a repository of family history. And
Mhm.
so I went there and I was able to find something I hadn't found before about one of the nurses. So, and then once I got all this information, started looking for family members.
Mm.
And I had a couple people who called me. They had information about the nurses, which I was very thankful for. Someone else last year, she looked up some information. She said, "Oh, here's this." And so, what was really neat, my mother had this one picture I didn't know if she was a nurse or not, in her scrapbook. And she was the only one I couldn't find anything on. I didn't know who she was.
Mm.
So one of the persons who helped me, she found out that there were these children who were children of Tuskegee Airmen nurses, of a nurse. So I called them and I found out from the son, she was the mystery woman. That one woman who didn't have anything on. I didn't even have a picture because I didn't know that was the picture
Mm.
in the scrapbook. So
Mm.
finally, I found all of them
Mm.
for all of them.
Wow.
So it's probably not going to stop once. And should I mention about the book now? But
Oh,
once
yes.
once the book comes out, New South Books out of Montgomery, Alabama, they
Mhm.
are going to publish my book.
Wow.
Um, they've published other books about the Tuskegee Airmen, and that's why I made a proposal to them, and
Mhm.
they said they were interested. So the book, please keep my name in
Book
mind.
signing. We will be
The
bringing
book
you here
signing.
for
Oh,
book
thank you.
signing fee.
Yeah, but what happened is I'm not sure what the title's going to be.
Mhm.
They're right now working with the title I gave it,
Mhm.
but just keep looking for my name, and you'll probably start eventually seeing media releases about the book.
Mhm.
Supposedly, the book will come out later this year.
Oh,
So
we'll
it
be
will
in
be,
touch.
yeah, so
Yes.
it will be after the fall. But
Wow.
the publisher, emailed me today and said, please tell everybody about the book, the upcoming book. So
Yes.
in the book, you will find more information.
Mhm.
And I have a website that I've kept information about my project at,
Excellent.
and I don't know if you'll have it on the screen eventually, but it's
I can type it in the
W,
chat.
okay, so it's
Mhm.
www
Mhm.
dot Tuskegee, Tuskegee,
Mhm.
Army Nurses, that's all one word,
Mhm.
at gmail.com. Because I can't tell you all the information I have on each nurse. There are 28 nurses.
Sure.
So
Sure.
you can go on that site and there's a biography on each nurse.
Wow. Wow. And let me ask you this. Why is telling the story of these 28 nurses, including your beloved mother, why is it so important?
The reason why it's important because as we've learned in recent years, the whole story about the history of our country has not been told.
Mhm.
Now, I'm going to mention too, all out there, you have family members who've done things, who are part of history, but they just have not told you yet. So you might go and ask your grandparents, if you have great grandparents, ask them some questions about, oh, you lived during the 30s or the 40s. Tell
Mhm.
me about what kind of time was that? What was our country like?
Mhm.
And so it's important that these stories get told. And that's why the Smithsonian Institute,
Mhm.
The National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., they
Mhm.
have my mother's scrapbook. I donated her scrapbook. I donated memorabilia from her time in the
Yeah.
military. And also my uncle was in the army, so I donated his items too. Now, I don't know when they'll ever have a um a presentation, but
Mhm.
probably it would be a good idea to have a presentation when my book is coming out. So,
Absolutely.
so
Yes.
I'm not sure when that'll when they'll have that, but um
Mhm.
that's one place where you'll find out a lot of stories
Mhm.
that many people might not be aware of. And if you were born in the last 20 years,
Mhm.
you might not even know that the 1920s, that was the roaring 20s. People were getting off then. Then there was what was it? Prohibition, because
Mhm.
it was illegal to drink alcohol.
Mhm.
And then we had what in the 30s, the Depression. And that
Mhm.
was a sad time. A lot of people didn't have money. They were in bread lines, food lines. And
Mm.
then we were coming out of the Depression.
Mm.
And then the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, which was an American naval
Mhm.
operation.
Mhm.
That put us into World War II. We hadn't gotten into that with Germany at war with Europe.
Mhm.
But when Japanese, which was one of the allies of Germany, when
Mhm.
they hit us, then the president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt,
Mhm.
said, we're declared war.
Mhm.
So that put us into World War II. So, but
Mm.
then you might have relatives who also were in World War II.
Oh,
And
yes.
it's really what's really interesting,
Mhm.
depending on your nationality, your race, finding out from your relatives. As a white person, what did you think? As someone from the islands, what were you thinking in the United States during that time? As an
Mm.
African American, what was going on?
Mm.
Why were things going on? And
Mm.
that way you'll get a fuller idea of
Different
history.
perspectives.
Yeah, different
Yes.
perspectives. And it's important to hear all the perspectives,
Mhm.
um, so that you have a full picture of the
Mhm.
history of the United States of America.
Wow. Wow, Professor Jordan, this has been extraordinary. And I know that you have mentioned that you may be able to share. Are you able to share
Yes.
screen with
Um,
some documents, and then we'll open it up
well,
for
it,
any
it
Q&A session?
okay, that's good. Now, what I clicked on my share screen, but it says you haven't let me in yet.
Okay, let me see if I can fix that right now.
This
Let's
host
see.
disabled participant screen sharing.
Okay, so I am making you the host now, and so you should be able to share screen now.
Okay, let's see. I clicked on share screen. It says you are the host now. All right.
Mhm.
Now, why? Okay, let's see. How are we going to do this? I
Okay.
don't want to, I need to get out of this and get on
Okay.
my, you all might have to give me a minute to click
Sure.
on
If
stuff.
you
Because
want, you can click the share screen, stop sharing while, and then, once you have what you want up, then you can show us again.
okay, let me see. Okay, there it is.
Mhm.
I'll just, if I get rid of this, yes.
Oh,
Okay,
awesome.
can
Mhm.
everybody see this? So what
Yes.
I'm gonna do, this is, as you see, that's the scrapbook,
Mhm.
the blue scrapbook that I found in my mother's, you know,
Wow.
um,
It's
apartment.
beautiful.
So
Beautiful.
what I'm going to do is I'm going to start playing. It's a virtual scrapbook. One of the students, a public relations students at Morgan State University,
Mhm.
she produced this for me. So I'll let you look at it, but I
Yes.
may start talking about different things.
Sure.
And so let's see. It's the first time I've done. Let's see. How do I get? I have to move me down.
Mhm. We can see it. Mhm.
Good, 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 good. And so this will help you ask some questions. my mother had trouble getting into the military. And as you see here, the National Association of Colored Graduate Nurses sent her a letter because of that. Mabel Stoppers, and she wrote a book about her experience. They were trying to get African-American nurses in white hospitals and in the military. And so when my mother contacted the organization, and this is the letter that was sent back to her.
Mm. Wow.
And so by, I guess, a few weeks after that letter was sent to my mother in March 1943, she was in the Army Nurse Corps.
Wow.
And now you're seeing, my mother's in the back row. I don't know, can you see this? That's my mother
Yes.
in the back row there.
Wow.
And so that's in there when they're in their formal, outfits. Now they had to have a gas mask training, even though they were nurses. They were trained as nurses. They weren't military people, but they had to understand what the protocol was for being in the military. I guess how to salute when the pilot cadets were saluting them, how to salute that.
Wow.
So, and these are all from my mother's scrapbook. So you're going to see all kinds of things. Some things I'm not sure what's going on or where she got it, but these are actually the pictures that are in the hands at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Ralph Cooper evidently was the singer, the famous singer. I guess he was the, I don't know what you would call him, the Michael Jackson of his time. Okay, my mother's cousin, that's my mother's roommate there. My mother's cousin and her husband in Chicago, Illinois, so they must have gone out for an evening. This is a poem. There's an area in Alabama called Wetumpka. I guess it's something like Wetumpka. And I saw a sign for it, but my mother has this, I don't know what it is, a poem or whatever. Now, the woman you see here, she was married to one of the Tuskegee Airmen. I'm not sure that was him right there. Well, that's not him. That was just one of the persons in her scrapbook. But overseas, they got married, and less than a year later, he was killed. Now, this picture, this picture is probably the last nurses who were on the base just when it got ready to close in 1946. And then, of course, this is my mother hanging out with the airmen.
Wow.
Or not just airmen, but now they had an officers club, they had dinner dances, and they had these little books. And people would write in your book if they wanted to dance, do one of the dances with you. So I thought that was real neat, but the museum has that too.
Wow.
So these are just some of the other things that that was in my mother's scrapbook. This was a program, I think it might have been when some of the airmen were graduating. And then here's another one of my mom. My mother doesn't look happy. And that guy next to her, it's like her cousin's there, but I don't know. Now, this is my mother's bad hair day. That was her commander, Colonel Cummings, who was in charge of the medical. And so I guess she was, maybe that's when she became a first lieutenant. She was a second lieutenant, and she did, get first lieutenant. That the other one picture you saw was her roommate. I don't know who this woman is on the left. I have no idea. The man on the left was their commander. He was the surgeon. He was in charge of the medical services, the nurses services, and I don't know actually the other two. Now, this guy, his last name is Savoy. He was in my mother's scrapbook. His daughter I don't think she had a picture of him. So she's a professor at a university. And so she sent me that. Now, B.O. Davis, you all might want to look him up. He was in the first class of Tuskegee Airmen, and his father was a general also in the Army. These are some of the women in their uniform. My mother I found some information that she must have been a godmother, but haven't been able to identify. I have the name of the child, I think. But I haven't been able to find her. And actually, if I could remember her name, I should put it out here because she might be watching. Another picture of my mother. These are some nurses and the young man. I have what his title was, but it seems like he hung around the nurses a lot. I think he was helping them out.
Okay. I know you mentioned how they said they weren't feeling too well oftentimes.
Yeah, but I think he did have a job, and actually I'm looking through some of my notes now. Oh, now let
Wow.
me mention this. This is Lockbourne Air Force Base in Ohio. And what happened is that the airmen, well, the nurses, they were transferred there when Tuskegee closed down. And my mother, you see here, she had a course in psychiatric training while she was in the military. So they sent her from Ohio to Washington, D.C., to St. Elizabeth's Hospital, which was the mental institution. And as a matter of fact, oh, this is the mystery woman. The mystery one that, and so hopefully when you read my book, you'll read more about her.
Yes.
But the nurses, they had some good times. You know, they had dances. My mother said they played what, penny poker. They had billiards. They had things to do on the base, but see, they had to be careful about going outside the base. Now, this is a Red Cross nurse. To get in the Army Nurse Corps, you had to be a Red Cross nurse first. They're the ones who looked at your credentials to, to make sure you were up the snuff, that you had all the qualifications to even come in.
Sure.
But keep in mind, initially there was a quota of just 56 Black nurses.
Wow.
And these are the nurses at Lockbourne, and the nurse right here, she became the first African-American nurse in the regular Army, and she made the Army a career.
Wow.
I believe these are the Lovebirds. One of the nurses married one of the men who worked in the weather department, because they had to be careful weather-wise before you sent the planes up to wherever the wind was coming from. Okay, here's some more.
Oh,
These
wow.
ended up being the Branches, Johnny Branch and Della Bassett. Now there's B.O. Davis, who became the commander when he got to Lockbourne Air
The
Force
one
Base.
at the head of the table.
Right, he was the first, one of the first in the first class of Tuskegee Airmen. There were 5 of them, and he was one of them. And there's my mother peeking over someone's shoulders. There's someone sick. I asked my mother, because some of the nurses married Tuskegee Airmen, I asked her why she didn't. She said they were sick.
Oh.
And she said she wasn't serious enough. But one of them wrote this poem to her. I hope you can read it. It's so beautiful.
What does it say? Are you able?
Okay, let's see. I wonder if I can stop it.
I see it. Wait a minute. It says she is truly an angel.
I paused it. Yeah, I paused it. She's truly an angel of mercy, bringing joy and gladness each day with cheerful words. Oh my goodness. It went to the next one. It went off of, I don't know how, maybe when it flows through again, we can see it, but it's like, oh my goodness. And these are the WACs, Women Army Corps, came to visit. I believe this is when they visited the Tuskegee nurses.
We actually still see the screen if you want me to pick up from where you left off.
Oh, okay, yeah.
It's still there. Oh,
okay.
It disappeared.
Oh, okay. Let me do.
Never mind. It's okay.
Let's see, share. Okay.
These pictures are beautiful.
Yeah, and that's my mother. She was with the weatherman. I mean, he married someone else, but now right here, that's Tuskegee Institute, Tuskegee University, the statue that's at that university. Now, 3 of these ladies, the first one, third's my mother, and the fourth, they all came out of St. Philip Hospital School of Nursing. And the one to the right of my mother was her roommate.
Wow. They were sharp.
Yep. And my one of the nurses, I call her my Aunt Abby, and she's the one whose husband was killed overseas. It was really a sad time for her, but I lost my train of thought. Okay, it was a sad time for her, but my mother told me that it took a while for her to get over. And she even told me that, and her name was Abby Voorhees, and her Mac Ross. He was in the first class with B.O. Davis, who graduated from Tuskegee Army Flying School. And
Wow.
Abby, actually that picture you showed, let's see, Abby, she's not in that. I don't think she's in that picture, but
Mhm.
she's kneeling. The next picture I think you'll see when they have their formal, she's the one that's fourth from the left,
Mhm.
Abby Voorhees. And evidently she was very popular there with the men. You know,
Mm.
she was very friendly and people liked her. And
Mhm.
so, but you'll have to read my book to find out more about it.
Well, we're
Oh, but you know what I forgot? I was trying to say, what was I telling them? She died in 2021. I mean,
oh,
2020, and she was 104 years old.
wow. That
And I
is,
interviewed her when she was in her 90s.
oh, I'm so glad you had the opportunity to interview her, Professor Jordan. Wow. I let me I definitely want to open up the floor if anyone I see we have with us, and of course we'll again, this will be televised as well. But I have my Professor Dr. Willer with us, and we have others as well, Aurora and Sidi, he as well. Any questions? Any questions for Professor Jordan? This is very rich data, very rich information. And I think there's okay. And yes, Dr. Willer said, thank you so much. I don't know if anyone, you can jump in at any time if you like to have any questions or comments. Dr. Willer, would I can read your question, or you can jump on, or Professor Jordan, if you see the question.
Oh, wait a minute. Okay.
Hi,
Oh,
thank you
hi.
so much. Hi, Dr. Akasi. This is Evildor, and
Hi.
I just wanted to let you know it's so interesting to hear your stories from your parents and your mom and all the historical perspective. I'm sorry I didn't open my screen. I'm in the car, so I can open my screen now, but I'm driving.
Hi.
So much. Hi,
Hello. Good to meet you.
my pleasure. I had a question regarding the history and how you preserve the history of our forefathers and parents and family. You mentioned that there was a place that you sent
Gave
your, yes,
donate
yes.
the donations from my mother, and this scrapbook that you're seeing virtually is in the hands of the Smithsonian Institution at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. What happened is there was a time when that museum was going around the country recording people's pictures.
Okay.
And so the day they came, I was living in Baltimore then, the day they came to Baltimore, Maryland, I was there because they
Oh,
were going to have also a presentation about African Americans in the military. So when they showed up, I told them about my mother. I told them how I had things that they might be interested in. And it just so happened one of, I guess, the curators, she lived in
mhm,
Baltimore. So she came
okay,
by my house and she took a look and
okay.
she wrote down what she wanted, and then a moving company came and took the items, and it was almost like I wanted to cry because it's
Mm,
like I'm getting my mother's the buttons off her uniform because her
Mm.
uniform had dry rotted. I did see her trunk once, and
okay.
she showed me her uniform, which was like a khaki, but it had dry rotted. So
Mm.
Okay.
she threw it away. So, but she kept the buttons, and I had her pins. Um,
Hmm.
and so other people can do the same thing. You might contact, but it took me a while. I had mentioned it, you mentioned it to different people, but I said, okay, I'm going to have to find someone who really has connections so that they will really take me seriously.
Right.
So
Exactly.
yeah, so it's right now, unless they're doing something with it now, it's in one of the Smithsonian Institution's warehouses.
Wow.
Wow. So Tuskegee Institute was well known for so many things. I remember my father, who's passed on now, talking about they had a school there and they were making clothing, tailoring clothing for his company.
Okay.
So it's so much history. That's
Right,
why
yeah.
it really piqued my interest. Mhm.
Right, yeah, because I'm sure Tuskegee University has a lot. Although these nurses, none of them ever attended Tuskegee Institute. They were from other nursing schools. But
Mhm.
I've been around some of the Tuskegee alumni, and they're so proud when they hear about this project.
Mhm.
Beautiful. Thank you. Ms.
Absolutely.
Michelle.
Wow. And Dr. Willer is,
Hi.
I could definitely see you doing something in honor of your loved one too. Like Professor Jordan was
Absolutely.
saying, is so much history, so many
Mhm.
untold stories.
Yes. Yeah, I
Wow.
look forward to it. To learn
Yeah.
how to do this and where to get the support and help. Yes, I have the stories, but uh, probably need to do a little more research in regards to what he had shared. It was fascinating what he had told me. I wasn't alive, but he had a clothing company where they made suits, and he was connected to Ford Motor Company. The suits were made by the Tuskegee Institute school students. I mean, it's just really rich history.
Right.
So I really need to put it in something that others can share and appreciate as well. But
Right.
thank
Mm.
And too, one thing about Tuskegee Institute, um, there was some like controversy in the Black community
you. Hmm.
because Tuskegee Institute focused on those subjects that would be beneficial to any race. That
Hmm.
helped the president get funding, farming, agriculture,
Mhm.
um,
Yes.
different things like that.
Hmm.
Whereas it wasn't at so much as teaching STEM courses. I'm sure there were some science courses, but
Mhm.
STEM wasn't one. So um, there's a great history there. And let me just mention, Morgan State University's president is a graduate of
Mhm.
Tuskegee University, as is Lionel Richie.
Ah,
Mhm. Mhm. Rich, very rich
mm,
information. Wow.
thank
And
you.
yes, and I there's contact information for Professor Jordan at www.tuskegeearmynurses@gmail.com. We have another question, Sadihi, and she's one of our amazing journalism majors here at West Liberty University. Would you like to ask your questions as well? Another good set of questions. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can totally hear you. I
Okay.
wanted to ask about the sources she preferred other than her mother's scrapbook. Like, it would be so hard to reach out to these nurses, and how did you do that?
Mhm.
What I had to do is first, since my mother had one of the nurses who was married to one of the airmen was a good friend, I just kind of, you got to tell your story, blah, 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 help me, And because I knew her, see, I had a personal relationship. We had traveled to her home in California, and I was living in Maryland. And we went overseas with her. We went to Europe. I was like 15 years old.
Mm.
And we went to Europe together. And Italy was one of the countries, and I have to share something with you. Her husband was buried in Italy as an
Wow.
American soldier.
Wow.
So, or American pilot. So even when we went to Italy, I was, wondering if she was going to go visit his grave, but at that time she didn't. And I don't know if in later life that she actually went there because, she remarried and had two children.
Mhm.
Also, I would even, Google. Now, I wouldn't use that as my primary sources, secondary sources, but Google. But all the archives, say, dealing with the city where, whoever you're studying, the city where they were, schools. I got information from schools. I went to Tuskegee University. They
Mm.
have an archive, and I found some great information there. The National Park Service, they had boxes of transcripts about the airmen and some nurses. And
Mhm.
I looked through all the boxes, hopefully just with the nurses. Then I went to the National Park Service Tuskegee Airmen National Historic Site, and then I could, actually see where they had kind of taken, it wasn't the actual Air Force base, but when they took their, let's say, their preliminary, when they were just learning, because they were getting their book, some of their book learning as they were preparing to go into the military from Tuskegee Institute. So, and also, let's see, between your primary talking to relatives, friends, people who knew them, looking at census records. Census records are really good. That's how I found when,
Mhm.
like some of the nurses, when they were at a certain nursing school, because like the 1940 census, let me
Mhm.
know, oh, she was at such and such a school. Or there's my mother's name, St. Philip Hospital School of Nursing. So census reports are good. And like I said, these ancestry.com now, I don't pay for a lot of these. I have a library here in St. Pete. It's free if you have a library card.
Oh,
Some
great.
places, if you have a library card, you can take advantage of what's already out there. And with Family Search, the Mormon site, that's free. Go on there and you might find information about your family and others.
Mhm.
Let's see, and then talk to your professors, and ask them,
Yeah.
what, give me some idea of, what should I be doing? How should I cover this subject? And as a journalist, I know how important that is because, as a future, as a former
Yeah.
student, although back then I was a mass communication student, but when I went to Maryland and American University, I was in journalism, radio, television. So I know when you have to do either articles or radio reports or television packages,
Yeah.
you need to have that information to kind of back up what you're saying, that you're just not doing something off the top of your head, but you are really researching to give the public more than just what they see.
Yeah. Exactly.
Excellent, excellent. Wow, wow. Well, we thank you so much, Professor Jordan. You have been a wealth of inspiration, motivation, and just an overall enlightening event today with our symposium. And we thank you. You've been very inspiring, and we look forward to inviting you here and having a book release celebration for you as well.
Well,
And
can I also mention, because
mhm,
I sent this information to you, tomorrow I'm going to have a different kind of presentation
mhm.
at the Air University at, what is it, um, let's see, oh, Maxwell Air Force Base,
Mhm,
their Air University, their library,
mhm.
and they even have a QR symbol that you can just put your phone there and it'll come
I'll
up.
zap it. Yes, I'll make
Yeah.
sure that I share it as well with those here. And then also when we send this out tomorrow through our television station, I'll make sure that they have that information as well. Yes,
All right.
very
Well,
nice.
thank you all for listening,
Thank
and
you.
hopefully I'll be able to come up on the mountain and have a good
Absolutely.
time.
We'd love to have you. Do you have any a final word for Gen Z, the millennials, and you definitely provided a lot of rich advice as well. But any final words during this Women's History Month and to bring it full circle and the Tuskegee air nurses and your
Um,
mom and just in conversation with today's generation, Gen Z and millennials.
yeah, Gen Z, millennials, here's one thing I would suggest, that there are stories from your generation that are important. And you might not think they are very important, but they are, and they may give you information for a story. Don't dismiss those kind of stories. And even if there's stories from your own family. Like I said, my mother was in her 80s and I finally researched her place in history because I never really thought about it. Actually, my son's history teacher was one who wanted me. I did one of my initial interviews with my mom because she didn't want to come to the classroom and do it, but he heard that my mother was at Tuskegee, and he told my son, you know, I want to get an interview with her. So that's how I got. I'm thankful that I did that because I still hadn't gotten into doing the project. So that's my, you know, what I would like to tell you, that please, please, the things that are happening in your life now, never dismiss it because it gives you information.
Mhm. Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much, Professor Jordan. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I know your mother and all the brave women that were part of the Tuskegee Air Nurses. I know they are just smiling down on you and keeping
Thank
their
you.
stories alive. Tell their stories, her story during this Women's History Month.
Thank
Thank,
you.
thank you,
Okay.
everyone. All
Bye.
right. Well, have a good evening, everyone. And we look forward to providing more interviews and bringing in esteemed guest authors and directors of this caliber as well. And so we thank Professor Jordan again. We do have a certificate of appreciation for you as well. So I will be getting your contact information to have that delivered to you as well. But thank you, Professor Jordan, and thank each and every one of you for joining us today. So
Thank
until
you.
next time, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.